Hi and welcome to PolyOriginals with Fiona Abel-Smith. So this is like a part 2 tutorial which follows on from the double glitter star decoration, and the reason being is when you make your double glitter star, we have a large sheet of this double sort of glitter background in the polymer clay, and you should have quite a bit left over, depending on how many things you wanted to cover. Or of course you could just do your sheet as is, not cover any polystyrene covers or forms, and just make something along these lines. So you can see there the glitter in the background. So we'll be using the sheet left over. We will also be using our leftover canes that we had from that previous tutorial. So I'm not going to cover them in detail again here because there isn't really an awful lot of point. Just to show you what we ended up with in case you hadn't seen that one. This is the star we did in the previous tutorial. So you can see here this exact same sheet I've used in the background and the same petal cane I've used in the background. So I take you through the whole way of doing this, how to make the form using a lovely template, how to then build it up, put the canes on, and then how to use resins. And I even finish it off by showing you how to do the beading technique. So as well as the leftover bits we had from the last tutorial, let's get started by seeing what else you need to complete today's project. So for the equipment you need for today's project, you'll need a polymer clay blade, a small roller, something along the lines of a knitting needle, just a tool like this. This happens to be a 4mm blunt-ended knitting needle, a little craft knife. If you have a ball tool, fantastic. If you don't worry. It's just to create a little groove, but you can use something like the knitting needle instead. You'll need a ruler or some form of measuring tool, just something with a nice straight edge. This metal ruler works perfectly. I'm using some little glass insets just to add a little bit of detail. You could use plastic flat ones. These ones are going to inset before baking. Plastic ones, if they're flat, you just add them after baking but before we put the resin on. A little screw just to put in the top of the piece to make it into a pendant. As we go through the project, part of the work we do will be done flat on the tile, which we will then bake on, and when we're baking we will always tent our piece in aluminium foil just to make sure the oven doesn't spike during baking. I'm going to be using a template for this project, and the template I'm using is this one. This is from PC UK Tools and is number 19, and the reason I love using these is because they come with the inserts. Now this obviously peels off normally. I like to leave it in place and I'll show you why later, but it comes with all the inserts and that's the one I'm going to be using today. A measuring sheet, and this one's freely downloadable from www.printablepaper.net, and this is the 4 squares to 1 inch, which I've just laminated for ease of working on. Do it in centimetres if you prefer, or just a piece of graph paper. You don't necessarily need this. And then the normal things, a pasta machine dedicated to polymer clay use is fantastic if you've got one. If not, just roll your clay into thin sheets by hand. And then wet wipes, wet towels, paper towels, just things to keep your workspace and your hands nice and clean and tidy. And then to finish our piece off, I will be using a resin. Now the resin I'm using today is actually this Kit Finish glass one by Cernit. There are loads. This is one of the 2-part epoxy resins that's going to dry over a period of time and we will mix up. If you haven't got that, then some of the UV resin works very well. As you know from previous tutorials, I've used that as well. So whichever of the resins you have to hand, just use what you have. But for this particular one, I haven't used that one in a tutorial before, so I will use that one to show you how that one goes. To add the little screw looped head, you'll need a little screwdriver just to make a pilot hole. I tend to make these afterwards. If you don't have one of these, then just use a needle or something to create a little hole before you bake, just enough to be a pilot hole so you can screw that in afterwards. And for the resin, I just use an extra little pot just to put the resin into so I can give it a nice good stir. And then, because you often get bubbles in the resin, you can blow on the bubbles to get rid of them, but I'm just going to use one of this. This is just the normal sort of pilot lighter if you've got a gas cooker, and it just gives a little bit of a flame, which is enough to take the bubbles off, should you need to do that when we put the resin in. If you want to finish your pendant off in the way that I'm doing mine, then you will need some small seed beads. These are size 11s. You'll need a beading needle, and I've just already threaded mine with a double thread of some beading thread. I'm going to use a couple of calottes, a couple of jump rings, and a lobster clasp. That's one that just opens at the side like that. You'll need some small scissors, and you'll need some form of beading mat. So this is one that's particularly used for beading. However, if you don't have something like this, just an old piece of fleece, so you can just cut yourself a square of fleece, and it's just something to hold the beads in whilst you work, just to make it easier for what you're doing. You'll also need a couple of pliers, round-nosed and flat-nosed, and if you want extra security on finishing your piece, then some white PVA glue, just the ordinary school glue will do. And if, like me, you've got a really big tub, then a little cocktail stick just to put it on comes in really handy. Okay, so we'll move on to the clays you need for today's project. You should already have your sheet of leftover glittered clay from the project we've just done. If you haven't, you need to get yourself a double glitter sheet, and I'll put the links to the video below as to where I've just done this to show you that. And also from that video we have the petal cane and we have the leaf cane, and again both of those were leftover bits from the previous project, which is why I've done this project as a way of using them up. A couple of quick things though. For what I'm doing at the moment, I don't want to use a purple one because I want something with more contrast. So I have taken the small 1/8 of a packet of the emerald green, the apple green and the mint, and I've got the same amount of plum as I used in my original leaf cane, and I'm just going to do that around the outside, and that gives me this to have as a leaf cane. So this is the one I'm going to use rather than this one in today's project. I've got some more of the Cernit black clay, which is what I used to base the glitter technique on, and there's about half an ounce, 14 grams of that, and I'm just going to put that through on my pasta machine and put it through on a medium setting, so setting number 3, and that is simply going to go under whichever part of the clay I use here, just to make it thick enough for what we want to do for today's project. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've worked out which aperture I'm going to use, and this is why I leave the backing paper on. I'm going to put it around until I find a piece that I think looks good for a background. And I've just spotted there I've got a flower in that bit, so I will probably use that bit. So I now know that that's the bit I'm going to use, so I can pop that through on top. And then I will just stick my excess clay underneath. So I've got 2 layers of that one there. Give it a little bit of a roll because I want it to be rolled enough so it's going to adhere, but I want to be able to pull off all the excess clay afterwards. And then with my craft knife I'm simply going to cut round the outside of this heart shape, and because we're on this sheet we can move it around as we go and move the clay rather than me having to move my hand. I'm going to pull those apart because I'm going to want the black clay for something else in a moment or two. And that still gives me a nice amount of glitter sheet left that I can do other projects with. So I'm just going to pull those apart. I'm just going to neaten down the edges because of course where you're cutting against the perspex it can pull up slightly. So that at the moment is too big, so I'm going to reduce it down. So all I'm going to do as normal is just press in with my thumb and fingers. I'm just going to do one end of it because I don't really need very many petals for this. So reducing it effectively a sort of square, and then when I've got it to a smaller shape, press down the outsides, round off the bottom, and see what size we've got now. So that's a better size for what I want to do. So now I need to cut myself 5 slices. If when you pull away it's become distorted, just change the shape of them slightly and then just place them down. I've cut the slices quite nice and thin because we're going to put a layer of resin over the top of this, so I don't want too much height above this. And then with that green leaf I'm just going to take some thin slices of this one as well. And with your leaves, just pull them and change them and curve them and sort of put them into whatever pattern or shape you want and add them onto your piece. You can add as few or as many as you like, and when you're happy, just stop. We're going to add a little bit of a detail in the middle of a different colour just inside there, and then we're going to add our little bit of gemstone in the middle, and that's all we need to do for the decoration. So I've decided to go for a tiny bit of green, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press down with my ball tool into the layers of clay below, because as I said, we don't want this to be raised up too much. So that's now fairly flat, and then with my tip of my knitting needle create a small hole, and then I can just add a gem into there, and it won't be too much proud of the rest of the clay. By pressing him nice and firm, I've got that little nice ring of the light green around the outside. So I'm now going to carefully pick this up off here and put him on the tile that I'm going to bake on. So what you need to do now is you need to look at the profile of your piece, see how deep it is, and we're going to create a layer of very fine black clay to go all the way around the outside to act as walls to hold the resin inside, and the resin will then float right over the top and the flower will look as though it's floating on top of the glitter background. So find the clay we had earlier that we took apart from the glitter back. I'm going to put it together by rolling it in a flat sort of shape to quite a long thin piece where the folds are on either side. You can then put it through the pasta machine on quite a thin setting, so I'm going to go setting number 5 on mine, and I'm looking for a piece that's going to stretch nicely across the measuring sheet. I can then take off either end and clearly see where the lines are. So putting the ruler on, I can then, with just the corner of my blade, give myself a neat edge, then put it at a thickness all the way along that's going to be more than the thickness of clay I've got on my piece. Carefully take up that strip, and then moving over to my piece, I'm going to start on a corner where it comes out to that point, because that's the best place to join it, and then very gently, making sure it's flat with the bottom of the tile at all times, just push that all the way around the outside of my piece, where it goes into the middle. Make sure you've got a nice tight bit going around, and just keep it going all the way around. I'm going to chop off that piece nice and neatly, so that when this piece comes around and joins, we have an almost seamless join. And I can now chop him off there. We've got the point of our heart, and the clay is sitting nicely all the way around. So make sure it's sitting nicely at the top as well as at the bottom. You want to have a complete seal all the way around there to make sure that when we put the resin on after this is baked, we'll get a nice flat top. So he's now ready for baking, so I'll bake him in the oven according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay I am using, and as always I will tent the whole thing in some aluminium foil so that should the oven spike it won't spoil the clay or burn it at all whilst it's baking, and we'll come back when this piece is done. With our piece out of the oven and cooled, all I did was drill our little pilot hole, and then I screwed in the little loop-headed screw there, and that just sits in the middle of our piece. So now we're ready to start using the resin. The resin I'm using is a 2:1 ratio, with one part of the hardener, the other two parts being the main part of the resin. So I will just measure those out, put it in here and start mixing it up and showing you what we do for that. So having emptied the two parts into my separate pot here, you just want to mix them together to make sure you've got complete mix between the two different parts of your resin. So you want to stir it until you can see no difference. There's none of those streaks that you can see when you first mix the liquids together. And now I've mixed much more than I need here for what I'm planning to do, because I've got a couple of other ones of these that I want to get done at the same time. But when you've got it all finished, you simply pour a bit on. And because we've got that edging, you just persuade it right up to the very edge. Have a good look down, sort of get down to eye level with it, make sure there's no areas that are left uncovered, and then see how bad any bubbles are that you've got. So I'm not too bad, it's just a few small ones by the top, so I'm just going to literally put the flame near to it, and that pops any of the bubbles. I will then leave this sat on the tile flat as it is. So I'm going to do a couple of other bits on the same tile at the same time, and then in 24 hours I'll have a look and see what it's like, and certainly within 48 hours it will be completely finished. So we'll come back when this one's hardened and we'll just finish it off as a nice pendant. So here's our finished piece with the resin all cured, and I've just turned the hook sideways on, and I've put myself some beads on my bead mat. I've got my needle with my double thread, and I'm going to take a single bead and put it right down towards the end of my double threads, and then I'm just going to knot that bead onto the thread. Do a couple of knots, get it nice and secure, and when you've done that you're going to go down through the inside of one of the calottes. The bead then sits inside, and to make sure you know it's the right way round, it would be the one where you can then close it and the bead sits on the inside. Once you've done that, very simply start stringing some of the beads onto the needle. And this is where the bead mat comes in handy if you've never done this before, because with the bead mat there you can generally just ping the beads onto your needle. When you've got a needle nice and full, just pull it to the end and continue until you've got the right amount of length for what you're planning to do for your necklace. I think I'm going to go 150 of these beads, so I will put them on 30 at a time so I know what I'm counting as I go. When you have the right number strung on, just go through your hoop just to check whether or not those beads will go all the way through, which of course mine do. So I now know I need to put a little stop gap in place so that my pendant will sit at the bottom of where all my beads are. So I'm just going to take an extra 4 beads, pull them down so they're on the end of my piece, and then I'm going to go through the 3 beads, 3 back, leaving the 1. Then when you pull, that creates a little sort of square shape. So now I know I should be able to go through there, and that shape will not pull through the hoop. So I now need to do exactly the same again. So another 4 beads, pull them down tight towards the loop, go through the first 3 but not the last one, and you should be able to push very gently down the cotton to make sure that's nice and tight in round the loop. And now all I've got to do is add on the same amount of beads on this side, and that'll be our piece nearly ready to finish. When you're done and you've got the same amount of beads on either side, go back through the outside of the calotte and up into it, and then add a single bead. So this is the bead that's going to sit down inside the calotte this time. Now I'm making sure that all the thread is nice and taut, you've not got no gaps or anything else. And I had probably over 1 metre of thread to start with, so I gave myself lots of thread to do. I'm just going to go back up through that bead one single time. And now, if you just cut one side of your thread and pull tight, that bead will sit nicely down into the calotte. Take just your thread on the needle, go back up through the bead. You can now unthread your needle and tie a knot in these two so that it sits down nicely into the calotte. Now you've got your two ends. Now's the time just to put a little dab of glue on those two bits if you want, and then we're going to close up the calottes. When it's such a small amount, I often find it easy just to put a little bit of the PVA glue on a cocktail stick. So that's one side, two sides. You can then, with your fingers to start with, close the calottes up, and then I usually make sure they're nicely closed up by using the flat nose pliers. Once they're closed up, you can snip off the ends of your thread, and then the opening is usually, or the cloth is usually open with that top, so I just curl that around to make sure that's nicely closed in, and repeat with the other side. So taking the jump ring, put the two pliers on either side of the opening and twist it away from itself to open it in that direction. Pop it through the calotte, pop it through the bottom of your clasp, pliers back on the side and close up. And you should feel and sort of hear a slight grating noise as that clasp closes up, the jump ring closes up nice and tight. And on the other side, repeat. Open up, put over the calotte and close back down. And there we have our finished pendant with a clasp ready to go. So here's our finished piece, and here are a few other colour combinations for you. This one is the red and the gold. This one is gold with a sort of a cerise coloured glitter. And this one is a deep blue with a bit of sort of black glitter in it as well, just to give more of a difference in that one. You can also see how I've done the flowers differently as well. So in the one we did, I did a large flower with a few leaves coming around the outside. And in all of these other three, I've gone for a smaller flower and then almost like a little bud. And that's just made with two petals on the outside, one coming on the middle, and then just a couple of leaves coming through. So this is the leaf we've done today with the technique I did in the double glitter star decoration. The leaves on these ones are the leaves from a little flower bowl, which is a tutorial I will put a link to in the details below this one. And just for other things, these three were done with the 2-part resin, the one I used in the video, and this one was done with the UV resin. Well, I think that's it. That's the project finished. I just thought it would be nice to show you something else you can do with the leftover sheets of glittered clay that you have, having done the star decoration. The double glitter technique is a really good fun one to do. You can use it for loads of different things. So these are just a couple of things, a couple of ideas I've given you. So hopefully you can now do your own thing. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that one. And for those of you who subscribe, I really do appreciate that, so thank you very much. That's it for now. I'll see you next time, hopefully. Bye.